welcome back to the Campden Interactive Series. Today we would be discussing a very important topic focusing on opening up opportunities for female family members in business. For this, we have with us Aditi Kothari Desai, who is Vice Chairperson of DSP Investment Managers, a fifth generation and first woman in the business of a 150-year-old DSP Group. Thank you, Aditi, for joining us, and it's really great to have you. I would love to keep this informal, conversational, so that our viewers can get a candid insight into how we're dealing with some of the issues that we talk about, and especially your views of the same. I will lead with a few questions, but feel free to sort of navigate them and take it where it makes most sense. So I'll start with just a basic introduction. Tell us about your family business. When did you join, and your experience?
Hi, Arihant, and I'm really happy to be on this Campden video. And so my journey actually began back in 1996, maybe, of working. So that time DSP had a joint venture with Merrill Lynch. So I did my summer in 96 with Merrill Lynch in New York. And I did that for 2 summers. And then I worked from 98 to 2000 at Merrill. And so it wasn't in my family office, but there was some affiliation. I could have worked somewhere else, but because I knew that we had an affiliation with Merrill Lynch, I wanted to build my networks within Merrill Lynch. And I think that really did help later on, because the people that I worked with, if they were junior, in 5 years were pretty senior. And, they were looking at India, etc. They were familiar with the landscape. And so that's the reason I decided to stick with Merrill Lynch, even though I had some other offers. It was very tough and grueling, but I look at it as bitter medicine you had to have so that you have a better work experience for the rest of your life, because if you could do this, you can do anything. After that, I joined the family business in 2000. I always wanted to do that. And actually, I joined straight in digital. That time we had Merrill Lynch and HSBC had done a joint venture on sort of trading, sort of like a Zerodha of today, back then. And then they called it off because, the bubble burst and all that.
Sure.
Yeah. I was always interested in this. And then I went to fixed income sales. I learned more about Indian fixed income, and rates were going from 11% to 6%, rather 5%. I saw them falling in front of me pretty fast. Very exciting times. And then we, was educating treasuries on how to invest beyond just government securities, and treasury bills is what they used to invest in. And then I was asked to join the asset management company and I was so silly. I actually went without even a job description. It was more of a startup. Yeah. And at that point, I just started dabbling everywhere and asking questions. And I realized Indian men don't like to be asked too many questions. That and also the boss's daughter.
Yeah, of course.
It was a bit nerve-wracking for them. Plus, I didn't really have a job description. So I was just thrown in there and I helped with the website. Then I realized that we didn't have a good process for returns analysis. But it was very startup mentality. And then I realized that in 2003, India was doing really well. The rest of the world was still coming out of the internet bubble. And I wanted to start a fund abroad for non-Indian residents to invest into India. This is 2003, 2004.
Yeah.
And so really pushed for that. I wanted Merrill to market it. They didn't believe that much in the India story back then. It was a whole experience on its own and a beautiful essay for business school. Pushed it, got it together. And, that fund was worth 2 billion in, after we launched it. So that was actually really good. And, I could show, it builds confidence that, you can do something on your own if you set your mind to it. Also, I didn't have biases to say, India will not do well, or things flop. So I didn't have that bias. You were young and you could just take the risk. I got into business school at that point, and I decided I wanted to go because even though I'd done my undergrad in finance and management, I felt I learned the nuts and bolts of finance. But 7 years later, I decided I needed more experience in managing people and in management in general, which is not something you learn a bit on the job, but it's kind of nice to learn it through cases the way Harvard did it, where I went for my MBA. And I think that really helped me with 7 years worth of experience, because I was coming with real stories, and with a strong purpose of saying I didn't want to do any more finance and I wanted to do business and management. And the funny thing is, people said, "Oh, do you like finance? Do you love finance? Is that why?" And I said, I love business. I realized I just happened to be in the business of finance, which is again why I didn't become a fund manager. And I stuck on the business side of things, which was also a big decision to make. And that's where my journey is. I don't know, did I not answer anything? One of the questions, Arihant, would you like me?
No, I think you covered it all. Thank you for sharing. And you touched upon this a little bit earlier, that Indian men don't like to listen, and very true. I think it's not only about gender biases. They have this whole entitlement bias and a lot of those features that come into play. A lot which you would have faced and struggled through your career. So, could you share a little bit about that, the challenges that you faced as a woman in the family business, being part of the family that was actually, that owned the business as well?
So I think it's just a subconscious bias that a woman has to be very feminine when she's in, but they can be completely, themselves. And that itself. So then when you are aggressive, or when you are assertive, they look at it as aggression, which they don't like. But they can be aggressive, assertive, whatever the hell they want. So exactly. That part I did notice, especially when I first came in. I was very naive. I would just do what I wanted also. And maybe I lacked tact back then, because you were young and you just wanted to get things done. My intentions were clean. I had no interest in playing politics, clearly, because I didn't really care. And I think all of that was a bit new for everyone. People were threatened to know whether, and competitive on their own. And I was wondering why they were competitive with me, but that's just natural instinct. And I think a woman then gets some kind of a reputation. And then it's very hard to shrug that reputation off till you prove something that's really a big one. And then they kind of realize that your methods worked. And I think, therefore, a woman has to work a little harder to prove, because naturally they don't come to you and they do not like to be questioned. Indians, I don't know if it's an Indian thing or it's a woman-man thing, but they don't like to be questioned too much, I've realized. In my firm, I realized that way back then. And so how to frame your questions became, you have to be tactful. How to give them feedback, you have to be tactful. How to reprimand if something, you were in New York, and if you didn't give something on time, there was nothing called follow-up. You were blasted and you were fired. Here you have to follow up and be sweet, because you can't be aggressive in the follow-up. And when I told, when I spoke to someone in BlackRock, I remember, lady, and I said, you have to send them a request, and then you have to follow. And then, then by the time you follow up and you do this, she's like, what do you mean follow up? What's that? You know, and it's,
absolutely.
It's something very different in India. Till there was follow-up calls come, sometimes you don't get the data. So all of that, and how to do it, and how to do tactfully, and how to realize the culture in this country is, different than what it was. And the US is extreme. I don't think our culture should be close to that. Because they are all trying to be compassionate, that they're trying to come in between, and Indians, it's on the other side, where you're trying to sort of go towards, getting things done faster. Correct. So I think there is an in-between point, and you learn that over time, and it's experience that teaches you. Yes, and I think it's a little tougher for a woman. I've heard even men in family businesses who came in had similar
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah.
You must have, and it'd be great to have just a talk on. I've come back from the US, and 5 years later, what were all my experiences coming back into the family
Yeah.
business?
Yeah. Exactly.
Um,
And
Man or woman?
I agree. And I think that, I face some of those challenges as well. There's also, in that time, and we're talking about circa 2000, 2002, there was this general bias in Indian family businesses that if you've come from abroad, then you don't know the grassroots of what's happening in India,
Oh yeah,
perhaps, or you're too sort of
yeah,
elite, or and a
yeah.
lot of times, that came down through my own family. For example, my father, or the type A entrepreneurs that have sort of put everything together from scratch, without
Mhm.
perhaps the more formal
I get that.
education,
Yeah, yeah.
that we've had, right?
I get that
Um,
all the time. What have you done? You know,
yeah,
and
that's
and whatever you do, well, you were born into this. So that itself is
yes,
something that, people have to realize that if you weren't born into this, you would be doing something else. But
exactly.
you have even if you do something else tomorrow, this is going to come on your shoulders. So if you don't figure it out today,
Yeah,
you don't want to have to do it 20,
absolutely.
50 years later. So
Yeah.
it's a tough one. It's a tough one, Aryan.
It is a tough one, and it actually is a great segue into our next question around support that you had. From the little that I've met your father, I feel he's quite empowering, and there's you and your sister, and I think you're both doing so tremendously well. How was it? How was his support structure as you came into the business now 20 years ago, or even more, 25 perhaps? And how was that journey? I mean, was it? Uh, did it again have its own set of challenges, and how did you go through with that?
So I think he's always been very supportive. Actually, I'll go back to school days where, people in school used to say that my father's an engineer and my father's a lawyer, my
Mm.
father's a doctor. And they asked me, what does your father do? And I said, merchant banker, not knowing what the hell that was. And this is
Ah,
the 80s where it was not very, you
so
know,
yeah.
well known what that, even I didn't really know what it was. Then once he gave me some book on what are stocks and what are bonds, someone gave
Mm.
him a comic book form, I remember, and I read it.
Ah,
And I first time I was 11 years old and I understood a little bit. But trying to explain that to my friends and that to my girlfriends is really tough. So it
yeah,
became it became a joke. Like I didn't realize later on, my friends told me it was a joke that your father did something, you know, that was not very kosher or something like that because it was just masked with this name and no one
yeah.
understood what it was.
Ah,
Um, I could say stockbroker, but he wasn't a stockbroker. So it
sure. No.
wasn't even that. So I got into this focus of knowing, I wanted to know what he did exactly. And so therefore it took me to business and it took me to finance and it took me to Wharton.
Mm.
And it was just this mindset wanting to know what it was about. And so he was very supportive, of course. He didn't believe I would get in, actually, because it was quite a long shot. And, it was, my parents did not at all, were not for my going abroad to study. So they were not very helpful. I had to do it really completely on my own. So when I got in, of course, then he was very supportive. And, and that was I realized at that time, then he realized I was serious and I realized he was serious to support me through
Mm.
my career journey.
Yeah.
And then of course, I worked in Merrill 2 years, and he got good feedback, and that was all good. And when I came here, I realized he just let me be because he was still very active in the business back in 2000. And then I moved to the asset management company. Also, he was not really involved in that company. He was more still in his
Okay.
investment banking. So he was very open about me going there, and actually I realized very supportive of even this new fund I wanted to
Super.
launch. Um, and even today, somewhere, I mean, he made me vice chairperson, and he made put me on the board, but it was after, not immediately. It was all very
Mm.
recent. I had to prove myself somewhere. So he's been supportive, but not given things to me on a silver platter.
Okay. And that's great, right? I mean, that's also it has to be a little bit of both. So you you get that validation at the same time that you know that you're accountable for
Yeah,
what you do,
yeah,
uh, and that in itself is empowering. Um, I think that it's I want to touch upon a slightly more controversial issue that heard in some of these Campden events.
yeah,
And this doesn't apply to you, Aditi, but would love to get your views, is, I've actually had folks that, women in family businesses that are working really hard, busting their chops, like really, really getting, a lot of even recognition for what they do. But given the way that Indian families are structured, especially maybe Marwari and Gujarati families, the equity of the business is still with their brothers or the male sort of descendants of the family. And then this lady posed a question to me, is that how do you therefore motivate the women in the family to participate in businesses and grow them if there is no direct linkage to ultimately to ownership or financial outcome? So how do you feel about that? Have you in your cohort come across situations where there is a little bit of sort of inequality in the way that sort of family equity is dealt with?
So when it comes to direct descendants, uh, I don't know any, I don't have a story offhand. Of
Okay.
course, if I had a brother, I wonder sometimes, but my father's been so fair, I have to tell you. He's been generous and he's been
Super.
fair. And these are two things I've not always seen, um, with, parents of this
Yeah.
generation
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think he would have been the same if I had a brother. I hope, but I do think so. Um, I where others are concerned, I don't know, but I have a view on wives that get
Okay.
married to families, and I feel that if they get married to business families, they should somewhere, if they are interested, and even if they're not, at least taught what the business is, because
Yeah.
mishaps can happen, sad things can
Oh,
happen.
absolutely.
Women always outlive men. They need to be taught a little bit about what is going on if it's a family business. You cannot keep them in the dark. That applies for your money, it applies for your investments, it applies to your family office, and it applies to your business. Um, and whether you make her a director on your board, or
Hmm.
involve her somehow in part of the business, explain to her what's going
Yeah.
on, don't treat her like she doesn't exist or that she doesn't know anything. Invest the time. And let me tell you another thing is, if you're a father, and I'm talking to the fathers of today, don't make that mistake if you see your parents making it. Talk to
Hmm.
your daughters today, because what could we do,
Yeah.
right? Like, talk to your daughters today about investing their own money, making their own money, the business, asking them if they would want to be part of the business. If they're interested, if they're not interested, it's fine. But then the sort of the share should be equit. You should be not biased just because they're not part of the business. Of course, I do believe people who are in the business get a little more sweat equity.
Yeah.
So maybe you can't be fully equal if the woman chooses not to be in the business. But that's her choice.
Yeah.
And
Correct.
you need to you have to tell her that you will support her if that's what she wants to do. And if her brother chooses and she's not, and the brother really does well, and there is therefore not equal equity, so be it, because he gets some sweat equity, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
Correct.
but she has to be given a choice. So that's how I feel, and definitely involve your wives.
Thank you for sharing that. That's actually very insightful. And I'd like to say that just from a anecdotally from a personal perspective, I think my father, very similar to what you said about yours, uh, very different for his generation, but has been very sort of supportive of sort of non-gender biases, at least in whether it's money or business. And for example, I have a son and a daughter, and he's always maintained that there can be no difference in the way that they're treated or the expectations that we may or may not have of them. Whereas it's very different in different families. Even today, it's even with our generation, for that matter. As far as wives, I totally agree. I think it's a morbid thought, but I think that we're living in such a sort of unpredictable, fast-moving world. The good thing about sort of entrepreneurial families and such as ours is the conversation never stops at the office. So there's always conversation that comes back home that everyone ends up being a part of. So, I do it with my kids, or I saw that as I was a kid growing up, as I'm sure you did as well a little bit. So I completely agree with you. So, I mean, we talked a little bit about the power of and significance of women in business. I almost want to say that it's, we always talk about women and men, but it's really should be gender neutral, right? It's about who does what. And a lot of people ask me, because I invest in startups, that, would you support, or would you sort of act differently with women founders versus male founders? And my answer is absolutely not. I mean, I don't invest in a company looking at who the founder is in that sense, right? It's always about the capability and competence. And I'm actually very happy I've invested in a bunch of great female founders so far in my journey. The one I didn't was Falguni, unfortunately, which I passed up like many others and sort of live to regret it. But that said, how would you, what advice would you give to the young women today in both lines, right? One is just identifying their own path in the world, either as a professional or a young entrepreneur, or joining their family business or their husband's family business, in a more operating sense. Any sort of pearls of wisdom based on what you have learned through your career?
Well, I would say that if you have an interest, you should not shy away from it, and you should be vocal about it. And you should see if as I said, as parents, you should talk to your girls about it, see if there is interest, and direct that interest if there is any, because she has to study and she has to get onto that path.
Yeah.
Right. And that'll give her more confidence later on. And so today, if you're already in your 20s or 30s and you're listening to this, and you now have an interest in your family business and you're not there, well, talk about it. It's tough to get in, I'll tell you. If you've not done it, suddenly you decide you want to get up one day and do something, then how do you do it without being the most junior person? At least start reading the balance sheets, talk to your CFO, ask the questions, take time, be very polite when you ask the questions. Keep using the word, please guide me, because men love that word. And, don't ask, because, a CFO will also could get like threatened suddenly, someone,
of course,
the owners asking me. So if you want to get in the business, sit, understand, read balance sheets, read about your business, and then go in. Don't go in with a sense of entitlement.
Yeah. Thank you. That's actually very interesting. And the bit about give me guidance and all of that, it's very true. And we laugh at it, but it's scary how true it is. And applies to actually both.
Yeah.
I think men and women, like, you cannot go in unprepared for sure. But I must say, much harder for women if, after having kids and in their 30s, want to step into a role in the family business. Very difficult, very daunting.
Right.
And I'd say I agree with you. I think if that's something you really want to do, one must do it. I think that, it should not be neglected. So Aditi, you've been a Campden member since I can remember. In fact, probably before we brought Campden into India. You were part of the UK association.
No. It was your brother. yeah, that, we were in touch with from our family, not our family office, but our treasure, the
Ah,
DSPIM, and they invited me to a meeting, and I really liked it. And I have to say, I've been a member since that very first meeting. It
yeah.
didn't take me long to say this is something I want to do. And I can tell you that forget the fact that it's helped me in work and opened up doors for
Mm,
DSP. But that's separate. I mean, that's not even an issue. But for me, it's really helped me as to discover other women also in the same position. I've made good friends, guys and girls, um,
yeah.
and much younger, that I feel like who want me to mentor them. It's really sweet, but also I learn a lot from them. I've made friends with people my age and older, and just and that's only in India. And then I've attended a few international conferences, realized how families abroad think, made good friends there, and it's just overall been an amazing experience. But it's what you make of it. It's about you
Yeah.
attending conferences. It's about you taking advantage of the international conferences, and then keeping in touch afterwards. So overall, fantastic experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being a supporter. I remember you had told me, in fact, that the flagship London conference was one that should not be missed. And I
Yeah.
actually went the year after,
Oh,
and
you
I
did.
totally agree with you. Yeah, I think that India, of course, has great integration, and we bring families, both men, women, kids, to talk about family offices, about family businesses. But I think the perspective you get from London and Geneva and New York is so
Oh,
different. On a different playing field altogether.
I've
So
done London, I've done Geneva, I've done Milan, Madrid, just
oh,
really,
very
really
nice.
amazing cities. I've not done the US yet, but I want to do that. And really great experiences. Wish I can do more.
Terrific. Thank you. Thanks, Aditi. And I'll probably have to hit up some of those cities soon. But yeah, I look forward to it. That kind of wraps up our discussion today, Aditi. Thanks so much for your time again. Is there any closing remarks, anything that you want to talk about as we sign off?
No, I just want to wish all the women there best of luck. Don't be afraid, don't be shy, know what's going on. Even if you're not in the business and you have no interest, tomorrow you will probably be a shareholder. So do
Yeah,
understand, just force yourself to learn and understand. Get to a point where you cannot be taken for a ride, whether you're in the business or out of it, if you're a shareholder.
amazing. You bet. Thank you so much for your
Okay.
candid thoughts. And the Camden community is really grateful for all of this knowledge contribution. So everyone, thanks for listening in. And please stay tuned with us for other such candid conversations as part of the Camden Interactive series. Thank you all.
Bye bye. Thanks, Arihant.
Bye.
Thank you.